The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across downtown Atlanta as James Brown sat in the back of a taxi, his fingers drumming nervously against his knee. Outside the window, the city pulsed with its usual energy. People rushing home from work, street vendors calling out their final deals of the day, and the distant rumble of the MARTA train overhead. James checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 6:30. He had exactly 3 hours before he needed to be on stage at the Fox Theatre, the most important performance of his 32-year career. His charcoal suit was freshly pressed, his shirt crisp white, and his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Everything had to be perfect tonight. The taxi driver, an older gentleman named Marcus with silver hair and warm brown eyes, navigated through the downtown traffic with practiced ease. James had requested this particular driver because Marcus had driven him to dozens of small gigs over the years, always offering words of encouragement and refusing to accept tips. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight wasn't just another performance at a neighborhood club or a church fundraiser. Tonight, James would step onto the stage of the historic Fox Theatre, a venue that had hosted genuine legends, where every one of the 4,600 seats would be filled with people who had paid actual money to hear him sing. His manager, Patricia Chen, had worked relentlessly for 2 years to make this happen, calling in favors, submitting demos repeatedly, and finally convincing the venue's notoriously tough booking committee that James Brown deserved this opportunity. The journey to this moment had been long and winding, marked by countless setbacks and small victories that kept James moving forward even when success seemed impossible. He had grown up in a modest apartment in the old Fourth Ward, raised by his grandmother Dorothy, after his parents passed away in a traffic accident when he was 7 years old. Miss Dorothy, as everyone in the neighborhood called her, had worked as a hospital cleaner during the day and a diner waitress 3 nights a week to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Despite the exhaustion that lined her face, she always found energy to sing gospel songs while preparing dinner in their tiny kitchen. Those melodies, rich with emotion, filled with hope despite hardship, had been James's first introduction to the transformative power of music. By age 10, he was sneaking into the basement of Greater Hope Baptist Church to practice on their weathered upright piano, teaching himself to read music by studying dog-eared hymnals he found in the pews. His grandmother caught him there one Sunday afternoon, and instead of scolding him, she sat down beside him on that creaky piano bench and taught him the hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," her favorite song. From that day forward, Miss Dorothy encouraged his musical education however she could, even when it meant sacrificing small comforts so he could afford second-hand sheet music or bus fare to attend free concerts downtown. Throughout his teenage years, James performed wherever anyone would let him: community centers, church functions, school talent shows, street corners when he was desperate. He studied the great vocalists obsessively, not just listening to their recordings, but analyzing their techniques, their phrasing, the way they connected emotionally with audiences. After graduating high school, he worked a series of day jobs, stock clerk, delivery driver, restaurant server, while performing at night, slowly building a small but devoted following in Atlanta's underground music scene. He slept in his car between gigs more times than he could count, survived on vending machine meals, and the kindness of venue owners who would slip him leftover food from their kitchens. 2 years ago, everything started to shift when a local producer named Vincent Martinez heard James perform at a tiny jazz club in East Atlanta and immediately recognized something special. Vincent introduced him to Patricia, who saw not just talent, but also the dedication and professionalism that separated working musicians from those who merely dreamed. Together, they crafted a strategy to elevate James's career, targeting better venues, refining his stage presence, and creating a promotional campaign that finally caught the attention of the Fox Theatre's booking team. The taxi suddenly lurched to a complete stop, the brake squealing slightly as Marcus pressed down hard. James was jolted from his reflections, his hand instinctively grabbing the door handle to steady himself. "What's happening?" he asked, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. Ahead, red and blue lights flashed in a dizzying pattern, painting the street in alternating colors of authority and urgency. At least 5 police vehicles had formed a barrier across the intersection of Peachtree and 5th Street, and uniformed officers moved between the stopped cars with purposeful strides. Some directed traffic toward detour routes, while others appeared to be conducting vehicle inspections, leaning into drivers' windows and occasionally requesting people to step out. Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles slightly pale. "Checkpoint," he said quietly, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by careful neutrality. "They've been doing these more frequently lately. Just stay calm and answer their questions politely. Should only take a few minutes." James felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. He had never been in trouble with law enforcement, had no reason to worry, yet the sight of the checkpoint filled him with an inexplicable dread. He checked his watch again, 6:47 now. Still plenty of time, he tried to reassure himself, though his racing heartbeat suggested his body didn't quite believe that rationalization. The line of cars ahead moved forward with agonizing slowness. Each vehicle stopped for what felt like an eternity, while officers examined documents, asked questions, and occasionally used flashlights to illuminate vehicle interiors despite the remaining daylight. Some cars were waved through after brief exchanges, while others were directed to pull over to the side, where more thorough inspections seemed to be taking place. James watched two officers escort an elderly woman to a waiting area, while a third examined her vehicle's interior, though the woman didn't appear distressed, perhaps just a routine document verification. After 15 minutes that felt like an hour, Marcus's taxi finally reached the checkpoint. An officer approached the driver's window, and Marcus quickly lowered it with the automatic button. The officer was young, probably not yet 30, with close-cropped hair and an expression that revealed nothing about his thoughts or intentions. His name badge read, Officer Mitchell. He held a flashlight in one hand, despite the lingering daylight, and his other hand rested casually near his belt. "Good evening," Officer Mitchell said in a tone that was neither friendly nor hostile, purely professional. "License, registration, and taxi permit, please." Marcus handed over the documents smoothly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The officer examined each paper carefully, comparing the photo on Marcus's license to his face, checking dates on the registration and taxi permit. Then his gaze shifted to the back seat, landing on James with an intensity that made James sit up straighter. "Evening, sir," James said, offering a small, polite smile. Officer Mitchell's eyes scanned James's suit, his polished shoes, the small leather bag on the seat beside him that contained his performance notes and emergency supplies. "Where are you two headed this evening?" the officer asked. "I'm taking Mr. Brown to the Fox Theatre," Marcus replied before James could speak. "He's performing there tonight. Big concert." The officer's expression didn't change. "Step out of the vehicle, please. Both of you." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of confusion and worry through James's mind. "Is there a problem, officer?" James asked, his voice steady despite the sudden spike in his pulse. "Just routine," Officer Mitchell replied, stepping back to allow the doors to open. "Please step out." James exchanged a quick glance with Marcus, who gave a subtle nod that seemed to say, "Comply, don't argue, this will be over soon." James opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, the warm Atlanta evening air immediately noticeable after the taxi's air conditioning. Marcus exited from the driver's side, his movements careful and measured. Another officer, this one older with grey threading through his dark hair, approached from the passenger side of the taxi. His badge identified him as Officer Reeves. Officer Mitchell gestured toward the side of the road where several other vehicles sat with their occupants standing nearby, all undergoing similar inspections. James walked in that direction, acutely aware of how exposed he felt under the scrutiny of multiple officers and the curious stares of other detained motorists. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand what could have triggered this stop. His identification was current, he had no outstanding issues with any authorities, and Marcus's taxi service was fully licensed and legitimate. Yet here they stood, separated from the vehicle while officers began examining the taxi's interior with flashlights, even though the evening sun still provided ample visibility. Officer Reeves, the older of the two, approached James directly, while Mitchell focused on Marcus. "May I see your identification, sir?" Reeves asked, his tone more conversational than Mitchell's had been, though still maintaining professional distance. James reached into his jacket pocket slowly, making sure his movements were visible and non-threatening, and retrieved his wallet. He handed over his driver's license, which Reeves examined under the beam of his flashlight. The officer's eyes moved between the photo and James's face several times, as though memorizing every detail. "What's the nature of your travel this evening, Mr. Brown?" Reeves asked, still studying the license. I'm a singer, James explained, fighting to keep his voice calm and steady. I have a performance tonight at the Fox Theatre. The show starts at 9:30, and I need to be there for sound check and preparation. He glanced at his watch. 7:05 now. Time was becoming his enemy. Officer Reeves nodded slowly, but didn't immediately return the license. Instead, he pulled a small radio from his belt and spoke into it quietly, too low for James to hear the exact words. James felt sweat beginning to form along his collar, despite the comfortable temperature. Beside him, Marcus stood with his hands visible at his sides, answering Officer Mitchell's questions about his taxi route, his passengers for the day, and how long he'd known James. The other detained motorists formed a small, uneasy cluster. A young woman in business attire checking her phone repeatedly, an older couple holding hands and speaking in whispered Spanish, a middle-aged man in construction clothes who kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. None of them appeared to understand why they'd been stopped either, their faces reflecting the same confusion and growing frustration that James felt building in his chest. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 3 or 4 minutes, Officer Reeves's radio crackled with a response. He listened intently, nodded to himself, then looked back at James with an expression that had shifted slightly, less neutral now, containing something that might have been concern or possibly suspicion. Mr. Brown, we've received reports of suspicious activity in this area, matching your general description. I'm going to need you to come with us to the precinct for some follow-up questions. This is just a precautionary measure. The words hit James like a physical blow. Suspicious activity? What are you talking about? I haven't done anything. I've been in that taxi for 20 minutes, and before that I was at my apartment getting ready for tonight's show. His voice rose slightly despite his efforts to remain calm, the unfairness of the situation overwhelming his usual composure. I understand your frustration, sir, Reeves said, and to his credit he did sound genuinely sympathetic, but we need to follow protocol. If everything checks out, and I'm sure it will, you'll be released quickly. We just need to verify a few things. Officer Mitchell had finished his conversation with Marcus and now stood nearby, ready to assist his colleague if needed. Marcus caught James's eye and mouthed something that looked like "stay calm." His weathered face creased with worry. James felt the world tilting sideways, his carefully planned evening dissolving into chaos. He thought about Patricia, who would be arriving at the Fox Theatre soon, expecting to find him there, going through final preparations with the sound engineers and lighting crew. He thought about the audience members already making their way downtown, excited for an evening of live music, completely unaware that the performer they'd come to see was being detained at a checkpoint for reasons he couldn't comprehend. He thought about his grandmother, Miss Dorothy, who had passed away 3 years earlier, but whose spirit he felt with him always, especially before important performances. She would have told him to trust in something bigger than himself, to have faith that truth would prevail, but right now faith felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Can I at least make a phone call? James asked, trying to inject reasonableness into his tone. I need to tell my manager what's happening. There are hundreds of people expecting me to perform tonight. Officer Reeves considered this for a moment, then nodded. You can make a call from the precinct. Let's get you processed first, then we'll get this sorted out. He gestured toward one of the patrol cars. James felt his legs moving almost without conscious thought, carrying him toward the vehicle, while his mind screamed at the injustice of it all. Marcus called out behind him, I'll contact Patricia, James. I'll make sure she knows what's happening. Don't worry about anything. But worry was all James could feel as he ducked into the back seat of the patrol car, the door closing with a solid thunk that sounded uncomfortably final. The interior smelled of industrial cleaner and worn vinyl, with a protective barrier separating the back seat from the front. Through the window, James watched Officer Reeves speaking with Marcus, probably explaining what would happen next with the taxi. Other officers continued processing the remaining detained motorists, their movements efficient and practiced, suggesting they'd done this many times before. James checked his watch again, 7:15. His sound check was supposed to start in 45 minutes. The drive to the precinct took only 12 minutes, but each one felt stretched and distorted, time behaving strangely under stress. Officer Reeves drove while Officer Mitchell sat in the passenger seat, both men silent except for occasional communications over their radio. James stared out the window, watching familiar Atlanta streets pass by. The restaurant where he'd celebrated getting the Fox Theatre booking with Patricia and Vincent. the music store where he'd bought his first professional microphone with money saved from 3 months of weekend gigs, the park where he sometimes sat on benches and wrote lyrics in a battered notebook. Everything looked different now, viewed from the back of a police vehicle. The city transformed into something foreign and unwelcoming. The precinct building was a utilitarian concrete structure in northwest Atlanta, its architecture designed for function rather than aesthetics. Fluorescent lights blazed in every window despite the lingering daylight outside, and a steady stream of officers, administrative staff and civilians moved through the entrance. Officer Reeves parked in a designated spot near the building's side entrance, then came around to open James's door. "This way, Mr. Brown," he said, his tone remaining professionally courteous. James stepped out onto the asphalt, his polished shoes clicking against the hard surface. Inside, the precinct hummed with activity, phones ringing, conversations overlapping, keyboards clattering, the general controlled chaos of a busy law enforcement facility. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt almost aggressive after the warmth outside, and the fluorescent lighting cast everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow that seemed to drain color from the world. Officer Reeves guided James through a maze of desks and cubicles toward a processing area where several other officers worked behind a long counter. "I need to search your belongings and document your personal items," Reeves explained, gesturing to a small table away from the main counter. "Empty your pockets, please, and place everything on the table." James complied mechanically, his hands moving while his mind remained partially disconnected from the surreal situation. His wallet emerged first, followed by his phone, which he desperately wanted to use to call Patricia, then his car keys, a small tin of breath mints, a folded piece of paper containing the evening's set list written in his own neat handwriting, and $43 in cash. Officer Reeves catalogued each item carefully on a form, describing them in precise official language that transformed ordinary objects into evidence. When the processing was complete, Officer Reeves led James deeper into the building, past interview rooms and administrative offices, until they reached a corridor lined with holding cells. The cells weren't the dramatic cage-like structures James had seen in movies, but rather small rooms with reinforced doors containing small windows, each equipped with a simple bench and not much else. Most were empty this time of evening, but a few contained occupants. A young man sleeping curled on one bench, an older gentleman sitting with his head in his hands, a woman talking quietly to herself while pacing the small space. "You'll wait here while we verify your information and investigate the reports we received," Officer Reeves explained, unlocking one of the cell doors. "Again, if everything checks out clean, which I expect it will, you'll be released. Try to stay patient." The door closed behind James with a metallic click that echoed in the corridor. He stood in the center of the small room for a long moment, unable to quite process that this was actually happening. The cell was perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet, with concrete block walls painted an institutional beige that had yellowed with age. The bench was molded plastic, attached to the wall, designed more for temporary sitting than any kind of comfort. A small window near the ceiling showed a rectangle of darkening sky. The only other feature was a security camera mounted in one corner, its red recording light blinking steadily. James finally sat down on the bench, his legs suddenly feeling unable to support his weight. He put his head in his hands, fighting against the wave of despair threatening to overwhelm him. Everything he'd worked for, every sacrifice his grandmother had made, every hour of practice and performance and persistence, all of it potentially meaningless because of a mistaken identification, because he happened to match a description of someone involved in suspicious activity. The phrase was so vague as to be almost meaningless, yet it had the power to derail his entire life in a single evening. Time moved differently in the holding cell. James checked his watch obsessively. 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock. Each passing minute felt like a small defeat, another piece of his dream slipping away. His sound check time had come and gone. Patricia would be frantic by now, probably calling his phone repeatedly, not understanding why he wasn't answering. The Fox Theatre staff would be confused, wondering if they needed to prepare a backup plan. The audience members would be arriving soon, taking their seats, expecting a performance that might never happen. James stood and paced the small space, his polished shoes squeaking slightly against the floor. He tried to channel his anxiety into something productive, mentally rehearsing his set list, going over the lyrics to each song, imagining the stage lights and the feeling of the microphone in his hand. But the visualization exercise that usually calmed him before performances now only amplified his frustration. A sound from the adjacent cell caught his attention. Someone clearing their throat, then a tentative voice. "Hey friend, you okay over there?" James moved closer to the shared wall, though he couldn't see into the neighboring cell. "Not really," he admitted, finding unexpected relief in speaking to someone, anyone. "I'm supposed to be performing at the Fox Theatre right now. Biggest night of my career, and I'm stuck here because of some misunderstanding." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "The Fox Theatre? That's major. I'm Miguel. I'm in here because my vehicle registration expired last week, and I didn't realize it." "Wrong place, wrong time, I guess." Another voice joined from a cell further down. "Name's Robert. They're holding me because someone used my credit card without permission and they think I might know something about it. Been here 2 hours already." James felt a strange comfort knowing he wasn't alone in his frustration. "I'm James Brown, and this is the worst timing possible." Miguel chuckled softly. "James Brown, like the legend?" "Not that James Brown," James said with a weak smile that no one could see. "Just someone trying to honor that legacy with my own voice." For a moment, silence settled over the corridor. Then James did something that surprised even himself. He began to hum, quietly at first, one of his grandmother's favorite gospel melodies. The acoustics of the concrete space transformed the simple tune, adding resonance and depth. The humming grew into soft singing, words about hope and perseverance flowing naturally, despite, or perhaps because of, his circumstances. From his cell, Miguel began to add a gentle rhythm, tapping his hands against the bench in a steady beat that complemented James's melody. Robert joined with a low harmony, his voice rough but sincere. The three men, separated by walls but connected by music, created something unexpected in that institutional corridor. James's voice grew stronger, more confident, pouring all his frustration and hope and determination into the notes. He sang about struggle and triumph, about dreams deferred but not destroyed, about the human spirit's refusal to be broken by circumstances. Officers passing in the corridor slowed their steps, pausing to listen. One stopped completely, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, her stern professional expression softening. Another pulled out his phone, not to record exactly, but to check the time, as if suddenly aware that something significant was happening. James moved into another song, this one more upbeat, a celebration of resilience. Miguel's rhythm became more complex, and Robert added vocal flourishes that showed he'd had musical training at some point. Other voices began to join from cells James couldn't even see. Someone adding a bass line, another contributing vocal percussion, a woman's voice weaving a descant over the main melody. The holding area transformed into an impromptu concert hall, the sterile space filled with human creativity and connection. Officer Reeves appeared in the corridor, accompanied by a woman in plain clothes who James didn't recognize. They stood listening for a moment. Then Reeves approached James's cell door. The music gradually faded as the occupants sensed something was happening. Reeves unlocked the door, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Brown, I apologize for the delay. We've completed our verification and you're free to go. The person we were looking for was apprehended about 45 minutes ago in a completely different part of the city. You were never a legitimate suspect, just an unfortunate case of matching a very general description." Relief flooded through James, though it was tempered by the knowledge of how much time had been lost. "What time is it?" he asked, though he knew the answer. 8:40, Reeves replied. "I understand you had a performance tonight. I'm truly sorry about the confusion." The woman in plain clothes stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Brown, I'm Captain Morrison. I oversee this precinct. What happened tonight was regrettable, and I want you to know we're reviewing our checkpoint procedures. But I also want to thank you for what just happened here." She gestured toward the corridor, where faces could be seen pressed against cell windows, officers standing with unexpected expressions of appreciation. "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've never heard anything like that. You took a difficult situation and created something beautiful. That takes character." James collected his belongings from the processing desk, his hands shaking slightly, as he pocketed his wallet and phone. 17 missed calls from Patricia, 12 text messages, 4 voicemails. Officer Reeves walked him toward the exit, moving quickly. "I've already called for a patrol car to take you to the Fox Theatre, lights and sirens if necessary. We'll get you there as fast as possible." As they reached the building's entrance, James heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see several officers gathered, and to his amazement, they began to applaud. The sound started softly but grew, echoing through the precinct's corridors. Captain Morrison stood at the front of the group, her hands coming together in steady, sincere appreciation. Even some of the other detained individuals who had been released to the corridor for processing joined in, Miguel visible among them, grinning widely. James felt emotion tightening his throat. What could have been the worst night of his life had revealed something profound about the power of art to transcend circumstances, about human connection forging bonds even through concrete walls and steel doors. The patrol car raced through Atlanta streets, lights flashing, clearing traffic with efficient authority. Officer Reeves drove with impressive skill, narrating their progress over the radio to ensure other units knew their route and priority. James sat in the back seat, no barrier this time, riding as a guest rather than a detainee, watching the city blur past. They reached the Fox Theater at 9:12. The marquee blazed with lights, James's name prominently displayed in letters he'd dreamed of seeing since childhood. Officer Reeves pulled directly to the venue's side entrance, where Patricia stood with 3 stage crew members, her face transitioning from worry to relief so quickly it was almost comical. James emerged from the patrol car, and Patricia rushed forward, embracing him fiercely. "What happened? Marcus called and said you'd been detained, and then nothing. And the show is supposed to start in 18 minutes, and—" "I'll explain everything later," James interrupted gently. "Right now, I need to get on that stage." He turned back to Officer Reeves, extending his hand. "Thank you for everything, especially for listening." Reeves shook his hand firmly. "Go make that performance something special. And Mr. Brown, what you did back there, creating music in a holding cell, bringing people together when you had every right to be angry, that's the mark of a true artist. Atlanta's lucky to have you." James rushed through the backstage corridors, crew members helping him with a quick microphone check, while Patricia briefed him on last-minute details. At 9:28, he stood in the wings, looking out at the packed theater, every seat filled with people who had waited patiently, unaware of the evening's drama. The house lights began to dim, and James closed his eyes for a brief moment, thinking about his grandmother, about Miguel and Robert and the others in those cells, about Officer Reeves and Captain Morrison, about the unexpected community created through song in the most unlikely place. When he stepped onto that stage and the spotlight found him, when he opened his mouth and his voice filled the historic Fox Theater, James Brown sang with a depth of emotion and gratitude he'd never accessed before. He sang for everyone who had ever been misunderstood, delayed, or detained. He sang for the power of art to transform even the darkest moments. And he sang with the absolute certainty that this performance, born from struggle, refined by adversity, enriched by unexpected human connection, was exactly what it needed to be.